Have you ever wondered where technology is taking us? What's next? What could possibly be new and exciting? What is coming our way in regards to technology and how it affects every area of our life, both personally and professionally? We are blessed with one of the most brilliant people in the world in regards to technology and beyond. Cue the intro. Welcome to The Real Deal, where we get real about what it takes to succeed. Whether it's wealth, health, relationships, or finding your purpose, we talk to the masters to uncover the secrets to defying the odds and creating your own rock star legacy. I'm Doug, and after working on multiple Grammy-winning records as an author, transformational speaker, and your personal translightenment coach, I'm committed to your growth and success. And now, here's the real deal.
All right. Well, before we begin, I must acknowledge our sponsor. Are you feeling stressed out, perhaps overwhelmed by trepidation on what's going on today in the world? Perhaps you need to bust through your anxiety with your guided hypnotic meditation. Go ahead to guidedhypnotic.com and download your free anxiety-busting guided hypnotic meditation. That's guidedhypnotic.com. It's my sponsorship. All right.
I like it.
Here we go. Amazing friend here, one of the most brilliant people I know, but his brilliance is only exceeded by his integrity, his heart, and his incredible commitment to things bigger than he. And we'll get into that. But let's share I ripped this off your website here, so I hope it's current. Is it?
It is current.
We'll see. Okay. Throughout his career, Scott Klososky has stood in the nexus between technology and humanity. He has worked to define and help organizations discover the ideal blend of technology and human effort. He is widely recognized for his ability to forecast how technology will impact organizations, industries, and our world. He is the founder and principal of FPOV, as well as a renowned consultant, speaker, and author. Scott's unique perspectives on technology, business culture, and the future allow him to travel the globe, guiding senior executives and organizations ranging from Fortune 500 to universities and nonprofits and countless professional associations and coalitions. He has worked with organizations such as American Fidelity Assurance Company, Roche, IBM, General Motors, Georgia Pacific, Legrand, International Franchise Association, and Great Clips. He regularly speaks in front of major conferences, helping leaders in countless industries improve the way they integrate technology into their organizations. He's the author of 4 books, including his latest title, Did God Create the Internet? The Impact of Technology on Humanity. Oh my goodness. So first of all, you have to say, we first met when you were speaking at Tony Robbins' Business Mastery. And you are definitely one of the best speakers to be at that place. And those events, every time we saw you, were, of course, just blown away by your information and what you had to share, and your acute look at where is technology taking us. So how has technology been supporting us lately?
Wow. Yeah, it's been an interesting year. I read somebody made a comment. I thought it was an interesting comment. They said that the digital transformation has moved 5 years and 3 months, and I thought that was an interesting comment. Obviously, the emergency work from home is something that no one thought would ever happen at the beginning of the year. By the middle of the year, we are now much more aware of what it means when you send millions and millions of people home to work. And we didn't have the technology to probably do it quite as easily 5 years ago.
Right.
But there has been a combination of technologies that give people remote access to business applications, video conferencing, just enough tools came together that without a lot of pre-planning in most cases, right, this emergency work from home that the pandemic has become that has certainly highlighted what technology can do for us. And it's really put us in an interesting state where for the rest of the year, a lot of organizations are trying to figure out, all right, well, what do we go back to? We did some survey work, and we were asked a question, how likely is your company or your organization to go back to the same model of 5 days a week, everybody commuting, coming into the office? And over 75% of the organizations said we're not going back to the way we were before. Mm. And that is completely supported by technology.
100%. Now, with one of the things I've been to several of your events, and I just need to preface the heart that you have and how genuine and authentic you and your family are is tremendous. I'm a firm believer of, how you do anything is how you do everything. And you have proven that to be so. Because you're, again, I really appreciate your welcoming, me the way we met and then just kept the relationship going is, it's just been unique and rare. And as technically, like I don't know what the word I'm looking for, but as technically savvy you are, you're more heart than tech, if that makes sense. And it's huge.
Yeah, I think there's a misnomer, in some cases that technology people, especially if you look at programmers, that they're non-social, or that they like machines better than they like people. My mother was a counselor all my life. And so all my life, she has counseled people, and I've seen that side of the world, of how important it is to be a good human being and how important it is to seek enlightenment and to try to improve ourselves. And so, yes, it just so happens that some of the gifts I have are over in the technology world and being able to predict where technology is going. But as a person, I'm very interested in what does it mean to be a successful and valuable human being outside of the technology, and then how do you merge those two things together?
Well, and that's obviously clear with Humology and where you've seen all this going. We'll bounce around timelines a bit because obviously we have a lot of crazy stuff going on now, but just some pretext into how you got here and the whole idea of future point of view. Where did you start? Like, were you always into technology? Were you an early adapter to things that came out?
Well, I mean, I started in 1980 in technology, so yeah, a long time ago now. My dad was a programmer at Boeing, which I didn't, he was not a role model to me that I said, wow, I want to be a programmer because my dad was a programmer. It was nothing like that. But when I got out of high school, I started thinking about what do I want to do? I didn't want to go to college. I hated school. And I thought, there was a world of new technologies, like PCs were first coming out, not even the IBM PC, but, Commodore and, the TRS-80, right, at Radio Shack, right? Those things were just starting to be used. And I thought, all right, technology is probably going to be a pretty strong field. Maybe that's an area I should play in. That was really, that you go way back, go back 40 years, right? That's how it all started for me is I needed to self-teach. I needed to learn something on my own since I wasn't going to go to college. And I happened to choose learning how to build computers and do programming. And, that's where it all started.
So you were like actually writing code and that kind of stuff, the whole if I recall on the Commodore 64, how to get something. That's, I think, the peak of my technological career when it came to that and how to have something repeat. But you were like building the games and such?
Yeah, it was crazy. I built business applications.
Even back then?
Not ever games. Yeah, so I worked for a company that put me as a lowly person in their new computer department and just turned me loose. And you had to teach yourself everything. So, I remember teaching myself BASIC and then writing an inventory program, right? Just a program to maintain inventory at the company that we were at. And I remember I figured out, for instance, how to record sound files. And if somebody did something wrong in my inventory program, the computer would talk to them. And in 1981, people thought that was like witchcraft, right? Because we had mainframes, right, at the company I was at, and I was working on PCs. And it was just, I think back now, it's just crazy. The things that we did, one of the things I will never forget, we had a mainframe. It was a data point mainframe. And I had PCs that we were working with. And I heard that there was a way you could create a cable that would make your PC appear as a terminal to the mainframe. And so I found somebody who sent me a wiring diagram, and I made a wire, like I made a cable. I soldered it myself, right? Put it all together, and then plugged my PC into the mainframe. Put a floppy, a 5 1/4 inch floppy drive that made my PC look like a terminal. And all of a sudden, my PC was a terminal on the data point mainframe. I was experimenting with things like that, and it's so funny now, right? Because no kidding, Doug, it was like witchcraft to the people at the company.
I'll bet.
And so, yeah, that's where I started.
So you were there obviously at the beginning when there was very little regulation, there was no compliance and so forth. And obviously you talk about, the witchcraft, the mindset. How did you notice, and is that how you also started to develop the future point of view and the integration on, compliance, regulation, and of course, user relationships, like, how that all kind of combined?
It started for me at 19 years old. I remember one of the early things that happened to me. Our company was selling PCs before IBM had PCs. We were selling like Victor 9000 PCs. And we had a lot of banking clients. And so we had a bank that bought a PC, and they wanted to do asset and liability management, right? I remember asset and liability management on this PC. And so we went and we installed it at this bank, and the banker's 65 years old. He's looking over my shoulder. And I said, someday there will be PCs on everybody's desk, right? You won't need the mainframe because you'll have personal computers on everybody's desk. And I'll never forget, he looked at me and he said, "Son, that will never happen. We will never give people computing power on their desks." The fact that I remember that moment now, right, all these years later, I was 19, I think, when that conversation happened, and it was a bit of a challenge to me because in my mind, I was making a prediction to him of something that would come true, and he completely disagreed with me. And of course, it turned out I was right? And I wasn't always right, by the way. There were predictions I made, over the next 3-4 years when I was talking to people. Some of them didn't come true, but I think it started Pardon me?
They didn't come true in the timeline you predicted, or just not at all? Like that something was
not at all. Not at all. I remember specifically people asking me, for instance, questions about software, and me giving them advice that later I realized my advice was completely wrong about that piece of software. And so I learned that there's a gift, or there's a skill in being able to kind of predict where things are going, or where technologies are going, where trends are going. And I think I just became interested in it because of the field I was in. Technology was starting to blow up, and more and more people were interested in my ideas about where things might go. And so it started young, and just kind of blossomed through the 80s. And I'm blessed to live the timeline I've lived in because during the 80s we got really the first versions of the internet, and we got email, and it got way past PCs. And in every case, I was always on the edge of that. And then people would ask me, where is this going? And so, by the time the 90s roll around, I had gotten pretty good at predicting, where technology was going to go. I'd made enough mistakes, honestly, right? I made enough bad predictions. I started to learn, okay, well, what are the filters you use to actually make a prediction accurately?
So you were a PC guy when Mac came out, or Apple. Did you see that turning into what it became? Were you an early adopter with Mac?
I was not an early adopter. I learned them right off the bat, played around with them, but I didn't use them personally. But in the early days, they were, I hate to say this because, everything I use is Apple now, but they were a bit more of a toy. I mean, it was just for somebody doing graphics, or somebody building games. I mean, they had more of a specific use. Mm-hmm. And so I was in the business world, and so it just wasn't something that I adopted. Now, I think I still was a fairly early adopter of Apple, but, it was not something that I adopted until Steve Jobs' second time around.
Okay. So, and that was after, for a while, I remember Apple had licensed and you could get, I guess, a generic Apple product, mm-hmm. Which was an interesting time for some who were into it, and they could get basically they could put together one similar to the way PCs were being done. And then,
right.
And that stopped. So you primarily business, when did you start getting into the marketing aspect of it? And part of this also going to lead to kind of also where we're at right now and looking at similarities to just how things are done. But how did marketing start becoming part of your, your lexicon?
Late 80s. So in the late 80s, I had just finished working on the Haldeman diaries with H.R. Haldeman from Nixon's chief of staff. And I had met some people in Washington, D.C. while I was doing that work. And the two other guys and I started talking about that we thought digital was going to play a role in marketing. And at that time, this is when AOL was brand new. There was really no internet at that point. There was no web. Mm-hmm. And so, but we had this idea of what would a digital advertising agency look like. And so we basically built a company that started off, and all we did was build CDs, CD-ROMs that were used for marketing. And then we built almost all of AOL's banners. And so if you remember in the early days of AOL, they did a lot of banners, and you would click on the banner and then go to some advertiser. Mm-hmm. Well, we had learned how to design the banners to get the highest click-through. So, we started a digital marketing company in the late 80s before that digital marketing was really even a word. Wow. And so that's how it happened. It's just these other two guys and I built a company, which we eventually turned into the company webcast.com.
Oh, wow. Cool. So, and I'm gathering that that's where you started really seeing the relationship of humans and technology, and that was, it sounds like the beginning of it, but when did humology and that philosophy really start to come into play for you? We could probably back it up to in the early to mid 80s. You had a lot of people writing software, and this was before there was an app for everything, right? So for people who are too young to remember this, or people who are old enough to remember it, back in the 80s there was an explosion of people writing applications, and a lot of them on 5 1/4-inch floppy disks. That you'd either buy or somebody'd hand to you. There were a couple of applications that were, I remember one of them was all about your physical life, right? And helping you physically, just to be healthy. And I remember when that came out, and it's so crude, right? But I remember the first time I ever saw it and thought, it had an interesting impact on people when they actually used the program to try to figure out how to eat or exercise better. There were all kinds of things like that coming out back in the 80s. And I would see these programs because I was a bit at a nexus where I would see a lot of things. I would watch people use them, and I'd watch the impact on people. And so it was in the 80s that it really started to get across to me that computers were going to have a powerful impact on people's behavior. Well,
then when the internet came out in in the middle 90s, right? Early to middle 90s, and email came out. Well, now all of a sudden, a whole nother door opened, because now it wasn't just a piece of software on your computer. Your computer was attached to everybody else's computer. And immediately became obvious to me. I mean, the moment I saw the internet for the first time, which the first site I ever went to was whitehouse.gov, because it was one of the first websites that was out there. And by the way, if you went to whitehouse.com, you got a porn site. And that was almost, to me, that's such a intriguing thing. Yeah. That, two of the first, 100 sites that were built on the web were whitehouse.gov and whitehouse.com. One's a porn site, and one's the actual White House site. So the moment I saw that, I knew, okay, it's just a matter of time till now everybody in the world is connected. And again, coming out of the 80s, where I saw what software would do to somebody's life, or could do for somebody's life, now I thought, okay, well, now we're connecting everybody. And what is that going to do to humanity in general? So, for me, it was 80s and early to middle 90s where it became really clear to me the concept of humology, right? The integration of humans and technology, and that was going to be a big thing. And ever since then, it's just been me observing and watching different flavors of that. Mm. So for example, AI, I look at AI now, and AI has interesting implications. It is both replacing tasks that humans do, and then it's augmenting tasks that humans do, right? So to me, I look at AI and I see it as, what is the impact now on humanity, and then just continue to play it out, But it's yet just another one of the technologies I've seen since the 80s of our interfacing with the machine, and then what does that do to us?
And did any of that surprise you? Was there any technology that you didn't see coming, or uses that you were like, wow, I didn't even think of that? Or were you kind of, as things were unfolding, as you were observing, kind of going, oh yeah, I saw that coming, took longer or less time than I thought it might?
Doug, I'll give you a general answer. I am always amazed at the negative uses that people find to do with technology. Mm. I'm not usually amazed at the positive uses. The things that amplify humanity. Those will never surprise me. We're very good at solving problems, and we're very good at doing things that help each other. I'm just always amazed at the way people figure out how to use technology to do something that is unhealthy, right? Or causes chaos. So for instance, social technologies. I think it's wonderful how social technologies connect people, right? Especially in our family, for instance, the older generation who's able to connect with everybody else, so that they're not just sitting in a rocking chair all day long, at 80 years old at their house. So I love that. Then at the same time, I'll scroll through what people are posting on social technology sometimes, and it just breaks my heart how inane some of the stuff is, or untrue, some of the stuff is that people. So I was shocked at the negative impact of social technologies, right? Not shocked by the positive.
Right. Well, and I guess, technology is energy. So it could really just enhance. So negative people, or when they're in a negative state, use it to create more energy with it. Do you remember, I would think it was the 80s when the first video phone came out. And I remember it was a box that you could, and it didn't take off. And what do you think the difference was? Was it just saturation and people used to it? Like, why wasn't it embraced when it first came out? I mean, it seemed like decades before it actually became a norm now with FaceTime and Zoom here and so forth.
So we've seen that a lot, right? I think about the Apple Newton. I mean, the Apple Newton was a handheld, years before a lot of other people had handhelds. And I always find that interesting, right? That the Apple Newton came out, again, back in the, early 90s and didn't go anywhere. And then the iPhone, some years later goes wild.
Right.
And they were both mobile devices. Some of it has to do with the quality of the technology. Sometimes the early entrants, the quality just is not there. Sometimes it has to do with the cost. It's just too expensive, so it doesn't have mass appeal. But I think a lot of times it's just acceptance. It's just, are people ready to accept this thing yet? And video was like that, right? I mean, we had video capabilities years before people accepted that. Think about how much Zoom has blown up, or video technology has blown up during this work from home. Yep. We've had this stuff for 5 years. We've had it for 5 years. Why weren't we doing this much video conferencing 5 years ago? Why were we not flying across the country for a 1-hour meeting? Like, why didn't we do this 5 years ago? Right? There's no technology reason. This is just humanity accepting a new way of doing things. And I think sometimes we invent things from a technology standpoint. We invent things, they work really well or work pretty well. People just aren't ready for them yet.
Right. So now cutting to like more current timeline, obviously no one saw all of this coming. How did that impact, because you have multiple, plates spinning, you have your speaking, you have all of that as you help businesses and grow your businesses from doing that. Then at the same time, you have organizations relying on your tech savviness. Did you have a lot of this already in place, i.e. the video conferencing and all that? Was this part of your future view, your high beam thoughts that people would be doing less of the flying across and so forth? You saw it coming and this just sped the process up, and you already had the infrastructure in place? Yeah,
that's clearly. I don't even think so much about work from home. I think about it as distributed work, right? I've been talking about the concept of distributed work for 10 years. It doesn't make sense to say, my company is in Cleveland and I only hire people who are around me in Cleveland. It really doesn't make sense for some of the positions. Now, if you're a manufacturer, absolutely, you need the people in Cleveland to come work at the manufacturing plant. But there's a lot of positions, marketing, right, or sales or whatever. There's a lot of positions you don't need the people to be in Cleveland, especially if your customers are all over the country. Right. So I've been talking about distributed work for years. None of this was a surprise to me other than the catalytic event, right, that sped it up. That's it. It isn't that I didn't think a pandemic might happen someday. I had asked myself over the, H1N1 and Ebola, and right, every time we would have something like that in the back of my head, I would go, someday the big one's coming.
Right.
Right. Someday the big one's coming. Didn't think about it a lot. I never did the math on what that might look like. But from a technology standpoint, there's been nothing this year that I've seen that really surprises me. It just sped up using tools that we've already had around.
So did that increase, was there pivoting within your clients and said, okay, well, we can't worry about that. Let's now just kind of pivot into this technology. And then the next step is, I guess, looking at the psychology. I think a lot of my experience has been a lot of the reason why people would say, I only hire people in Cleveland, is because they want to be able to monitor them. They want to make sure that they're not, showing up late and coming and so forth. So new security and other technologies, I guess, may be part of the comfort factor that you've developed.
Yeah, so there's a trust level that some companies are getting that you can use a work from home model. Look, the way to think about this, Doug, is there will be 5 different work from home models. And I think almost every organization will go to one of these 5, right? Either a full work from home. So we're a small company and we really don't need an office. We can just do distributed work. Let's just say I'm in the heat and air company. Right? I don't need an office. Everybody's out in vans. We just don't need an office anymore. Right? So full work from home, partial work from home. Let's say I'm a manufacturer. I got to have some people come into the plant, but the rest of the people can all work from home. So partial work from home. Voluntary work from home, right? So anybody who wants to can work from home, or if you want to work from the office, you can work from the office, right? It's your choice. What I'll call HR mandated work from home, or HR allowed, where HR says we're going to give you 45 work from home days a year, and you can just pick them, right? Whatever 45 days you want to work from home, take them. And then the last one would be a scheduled work from home. So in other words, we're all going to work together Monday, Wednesday, but we're going to work from home Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. Unless you just don't want to. Like if you need to work at the office because you have a bunch of distractions at home, come to the office. But those are 5 different models. And I think what's going to happen is every company will move to one of those 5 models. I think rare will be the company who just goes back to 5 days a week, everybody come in, right? Everybody commute, because they've gotten the trust factor now, because they probably put in a little bit better technology than they had before. And they've realized that they can expand their workforce if they do allow work from home a little bit, as opposed to if I force everybody to come into the office 5 days a week, I shrink my workforce, right, to only people who are willing to do that.
So in the storage, obviously things become more cloud-based, and that's made that possible as well. And this sounds like a kind of a weird observation, but one of the reasons why it seemed that like when everything became digitized, that there was going to be less paper use. Yet for a while, it seemed like everything was printed out, everything was stored, separately as like sort of a redundancy or so forth, which may have been one of the reasons why there were offices. Have you found that people have gotten more used to the exclusive digital storage where they're not feeling the need to be printing out as much, and that also facilitates less of a need for office space?
Yeah, no question. I'll give you a perfect example. There was an organization that we knew that had a payables process, and the payables process was people sent them invoices, some on paper, some electronic. They would print checks. They would take them to the CFO. The CFO would sign all the checks, and then they would stick the checks in the mail. Right, that was their payables process. COVID happens. They have to pay bills. No one's sitting together. You can't print checks because you're not at the office. The CFO can't sign checks, right? So they very quickly switched over to a fully electronic payable system and made all their vendors submit everything electronically. They okayed it electronically. They ACH'd the money into people's accounts. They went completely electronic, and it took them about 2 or 3 weeks. Now, they were forced to do that, right, because of COVID, because they couldn't all go down to the office and do the process in the old way. So there's a decent amount of that, right, you can't print paper if you're not at the office, or if you did print it, you can't share it with anybody. So, this just, again, sped up automating processes. And that comment about the digital transformation went 5 years and 3 months, that's why people say that, is because it forced companies to automate. I got to laughing about how many companies rolled to Microsoft Teams. Our company had been on Microsoft Teams ever since Teams came out. Now, we had a lot of clients who called us and said, we're going on Teams. Like right in the middle of this, they emergency rushed out getting everybody on Teams. And again, I kind of laughed because you could have done this anytime in the last 2-3 years, right? But this just forced you to do it. And now a lot of them are Teams bigots, right? They love Teams. It's the only thing they're going to use, use it from now on. So it's kind of funny. But
you're on Zoom right now. How come you didn't have them use Teams?
Yeah. But I get it's so for us, because we have lots of clients. We have some clients, they will only use WebEx, and some clients that will only use Teams and will only use Zoom, and they all have their reasons for why they will only use these things. And we end up having to use everything. Whatever the client wants, that's the platform we have to use.
And I'm sure some of them who are on it now kind of like, why didn't I start this sooner? Why didn't I could have done this, 2 years ago, 5 years ago? This would have saved, so much. So looking at, one of the things you're so brilliant at, obviously, is that high beam look at things. Where do you see offices, though, actually going? Do you see the buildings closing down, like the footprints just shrinking?
I think you'll see the footprint shrink and the offices will change. I think you'll see a lot more meeting space and more hoteling. So I think you'll see less and less assigning an office to people. So if you actually look at what the floor looks like, you'll have more small conference rooms, and then you'll have just office space that's not assigned, right? What they call hoteling.
Right.
And so I've talked to a number of commercial real estate organizations, and they're already heading in this way. I mean, they already have figured out we've got to reconfigure our buildings because this is what companies are going to want. The days of putting everybody into assigned cubes or having big offices that people are assigned to, those are going to go away as more and more people are either working from home or more often they're doing a hybrid. Right.
So,
they're only in the office a couple of days a week.
So do you think it'll be kind of like, WeWork now defunct, but like places like that, or they're just going to, for their office, say, hey, just kind of pick a space and not necessarily be leasing spaces like at a Regis or something like that?
You're going to have both. I think you're going to have, you're going to have a Regis in some cases. I think, again, it might just be configured a little bit differently. Or you're going to have just shared space places where people can go. But if you are a big corporation, I think less and less will you be thinking, I need a big building. It's like I can use less space and save money and reorganize that space so that it works more for people coming in when they need to come in.
Right. So how do you then now see, as we transition a little to kind of the way you've been marketing and building your business, one of the ways you do so is public speaking and going into conferences and that kind of experience. How do you see the hybrid working as far as, my personal preference is speaking in front of the actual people rather than doing it virtually. I don't know where you're at. I'm going to guess you're probably very comfortable in both, but there is an element of being on, in a group of people, and you use technology there. You use the iPad, and you're able to communicate and have questions that way. Where do you see that going?
Yeah, so it's a huge question right now in the speaking industry. The first question people ask is, will we go back to having in-person events? And the answer to that is absolutely we will. People love to travel. I think this gives people an excuse to go to another city, right? So they love to do that and paid for by their company. Right. And then they love to network, right? They love to get together and network. So I've never believed that annual events, right? An association's annual event or a big company's annual event, I've never believed those will go away. Those will come back as soon as people feel safe to do it. I think smaller events will move a bit more hybrid. I just did an event that had 50 people at it in person and, another 20 people online. Mm-hmm. So I think smaller events, you may see move a little bit more to hybrid models, where some people will get together, some people will attend online. I think what you'll see a large growth in is video only events, but I don't think that those events necessarily are replacing what used to be in-person events. I think they will augment it. So we'll see more online-only events where we did not have an event before. Okay, so in other words, somebody who's starting an event new from the ground up, the way that they will start it is as an online-only event. And then maybe later, right, it becomes an in-person event. And so I kind of think that's where events go. From a speaking standpoint, I think, no question, I like talking in front of people more than I like talking in front of a camera. With that said, you're right. I'm completely comfortable with both. I don't have a strong emotional need either way. In other words, some speakers, if they need to feed off the energy of the crowd, I'm not that way. I have just as much energy if I'm talking to a camera back in our studio
Right.
In fact, I have a rule. Our people never tell me how many people are watching.
Right.
And it's not because I care if there were 1,000 or 2,000 people watching. It's that I don't want to be any different if there's only 10 people watching. Right. So they just never show me or tell me who's out there. And I always talk to the audience the way I always would, with the same amount of energy.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm a little bit ambivalent. The big deal is travel. Right. So when you're a speaker, and I am one who has to travel all the time to speeches, that's the thing is, all right, well, it wouldn't hurt my feelings to have half my talks be in person and half my talks be on video.
Right.
Especially sometimes, international. I don't mind international travel if I'm going to go stay at a country and it's a country I want to go to and stay there for 3 or 4 days.
Right.
I don't like international travel when it's like, Scott, can you come give this speech in Paris? And I'm flying there and flying right back, the next day, to do a 1-hour speech, so.
Well, so then now
definitely,
go ahead.
Well, definitely the market's going to change. Probably won't change as much as some people think it will, in that there'll still be a lot of in-person events, but there will be a burgeoning growth in video-only events. And I think if you want to be a speaker who can really help the world, you're going to have to be very comfortable in both formats.
Of course. And do you see, like, I know Tony Robbins he did the hologram and so forth. Do you see technologies like that it's going to have more focus and people are going to experiment more with ways to make these virtual experiences more engaging and more multidimensional if possible?
Yeah, I really do think so. Doug, I spent years going to Life Church, right? And Life Church is now, I think, the largest church in the U.S. And they pioneered doing video delivery of Craig's messages. And I went to Life Church when it was all in person. It was one location. So I was around when they bought a second location and then a third location, and when Craig couldn't drive around to the locations anymore. And so he started to use video and just preach from one location and do video at the other ones. And I remember people saying, it'll never work. It'll never work. The pastor's got to be there in person. And Craig and his team tried it, and it didn't seem to bother people at all. Right, to have him up on a big screen. That wasn't hologram, that was just video.
Right.
And of course now, Life Church and other churches are doing that kind of thing, at campuses, hundreds of campuses all over the U.S. where there's not a live pastor presenting and the audience is fine.
Well, it is.
Why?
It's a hybrid there, though, because they do have like the junior pastors, so there is some.
Sure.
It's not like they're just
the
going
campus pastor.
Yeah.
Yeah. They got a campus pastor and they got music, that it's local musicians. So it's a bit of a hybrid. And it's the same thing when you ask about, holograms. Sure, we're going to get better and better at technology to be able to hologram somebody so it looks like they're live. But I think what's going to become more and more normal is you're going to put on an event, you're going to have 4 speakers, right? 2 speakers are going to be there in person and 2 speakers are going to come in on video. And I think that's going to be a very normal way that you do events from now on. Whereas in the past, the thinking was all the speakers have to be there in person. And I've never understood that. I just never have. Think about the last event you and I were at together, right? The Great Conversation event that Ron Werman puts on. Everyone has to be there in person. And there's no reason for that. He could have 2 or 3 people be in person and 2 or 3 people come in on video. The audience would be perfectly happy with that.
And with the technology now, obviously, and especially the way you did it, you already prep people for the hybrid experience, because rather than just raise our hand and ask a question, they typed it in and you were, able to answer it that way anyway, which then conditions people to be seeing someone on the screen and know that they could still ask a question. And I think that's where the necessity is for the hybridization, so that people could still feel that connection, that it's not just like they're watching a recording. To have some sort of interaction is huge.
Yeah, I'll tell you a story. I had a client in London last year, and they asked me to come speak. I flew over to London, gave a speech. It went really well. It was for their employees, and it went very well. They liked what I did. I come back home 2 weeks later. They call again and say, "Hey, will you come back? We want you to give another speech to a different group of employees." And I couldn't do it. And I said, "Let me just video in. I'll video in. I'll use Slido. They can all ask me questions. I'll be able to see them. They'll be able to see me. No problem. And it'll cost you quite a bit less, right? Because I'm not going to have to fly all the way there and back. You don't have to pay the flights and pay my higher fee." And at first they're like, we really like having you here in person, blah, blah. Well, they eventually said, let's do the video. So I do the video. I interact with the audience. They're sending me questions. I'm answering their questions. I could see on their face, when I was done with that, they were like, "Why would we ever have him come back here again?" Right? I mean, that was just about as good as when he was here, and we paid him a lot less money, right? And so sure enough, ever since then, they have had me video.
Wow.
With their folks. Now, I love London, right? I miss the trip to London in some ways, but I would rather do more speeches for them and do them by video than do less because I have to be there in person.
Well, and a good friend of mine who's a speaker, his model is when he does virtual, if it was that situation, his fee actually goes up because they're not paying. So they save money and he earns more because he's like, look, you're saving a good $5,000, or if you're if you're flying your other people in and all of that, like I just saved you $15,000 to not come and do it. So, my fee actually just went up. And he doesn't say it quite like that, but that's his rationale, and it hasn't been an issue. And I'm not suggesting you raise your prices by any stretch. I'm just sharing another person's perspective, another speaker who's been dealing with this same challenge and saw an opportunity that since he was saving the company money, he was going to, profit a little.
Yeah.
Yes. The other issue is if you could do more of them, now you have a volume.
Yeah, well, I've definitely seen the fees are rising on video. So I think there is a bit of that dynamic out there. But I think also the speakers are saying, I don't have to travel, but I still have to prepare, and, it's still, the same, unique, valuable content. And so I think, what I've seen the last 3 months is my fees and other people's fees are slowly creeping up, even doing video.
Yep. And how have you found when it comes to marketing yourself as a speaker? I mean, you already had your clients already, but have you changed the way you market for your business and for speaking with all of this new dynamic?
Not on the consulting side. On the consulting side, we were always good at working remotely with clients, and so that there's no difference there. We just do more working remotely. On the speaking side, the only thing that I do that's maybe different is I just make sure people know that we have a studio and I'm completely comfortable with video, and I've got some tricks up my sleeve of things we can do with video. So that's all. Is just when somebody reaches out now, we just give them a choice. It's like, well, I can be there in person, or we've got a inventory of things we can do with video.
So now let's love it. I mean, let's look at how we're dealing with then all of these challenges with COVID, with then, the political climate and all of that. How do you see technology impacting, and have you seen changes in the way technology is being used to influence, to get messaging? And do you see, some opportunity for people to, improve things? Because you shared earlier about also surprised about the negativity. How could we utilize technology for good at this stage?
Well, certainly there's a lot we could do with tracking pandemics. So there's a real fine line between that and privacy. But I think that we got a lot of room to run on how to use technology to slow down or stop a pandemic. So I'm sure as entrepreneurial as we are in the U.S. and other countries are becoming, you'll see for the next year a lot of new applications come out that will be able to help stop or will better track disease spread. So definitely technology will do that. I think automation, no question that when you send a bunch of people home to work, you start seeing what it is that you need to automate. Mm-hmm. And so there will be a ripples in the pond now for a year or two of organizations automating things. So they say, hey, the next time this kind of thing happens and we have to go emergency work from home, we want to have automated a lot of these processes so that we don't have problems, when people go work from home. So I think we'll see technology used to do a lot of automation, which means a lot of AI, a lot of RPA, right? A lot of machine learning. You'll see a lot of those tools get used to try to automate things. Mm-hmm. And then, Internet of Things has been growing for a while, right? Wearables and Internet of Things, so smart devices. I think we will see more and more applications of smart devices, both for health reasons, tracking things, but not just a pandemic health response. As soon as you understand that you can use wearable devices to help with a pandemic, you're also going to say, well, if we have people in the field in West Texas at an oil yard, we don't want them out in 105 degrees unless they got a wearable on, so we can track and make sure that they're, not getting into an unsafe situation. So I think we'll see more and more use of Internet of Things to gather huge amounts of data to be able to tell us the status of a device or the status of a person.
And so now what's so interesting about that whole conversation when you talk about, the trust factor and so forth, the homology of it, and then how this all started was with the programming of the technology, which comes from the human. How, we've had this conversation before about, autonomous cars, like, how are they going to make a decision? Do we, hit the kid or do we hit the tree? Does everyone die or just the one person die? Without infusing, and not to say that technology is immoral, it's agnostic. It is basically whatever is programmed into it. How could we have some checks and balances as we do?
That's not true. That's not true.
Which isn't?
It's not true that it is what we programmed into it. You got to separate two things, okay? If there's an AI, like autonomous car AI that we've built and we've programmed it as human beings, then we have set the ethics in that. If you develop self-learning vehicles or self-learning AIs, then we have not built the ethics in those because they're self-learning. So they may go develop their own ethics. So unless we put parameters around that, there are situations now where AIs are basically creating their own ethics.
And then,
so anyway, I just want to make sure. You have to be careful when you say that there's a huge ethics problem with software, right? A huge, with the ethics of the software. It's a huge issue that we've got to be careful of in many areas, including autonomous cars. I just want to make sure that you got the distinction.
Yes. Well,
there's a difference between I wrote the AI, it's got my ethics, versus it's a self-learning AI, it's developed its own ethics.
Got it. Well, and I guess where I was going to that is like Ultron. Like then, the Marvel AI that granted, I guess the theory behind it, again, I know it's science fiction, but the idea that there was that amalgamation of the, Tony Stark and what's his name? The other
Jarvis
and all of that, which has some fundamentals. But, when you talk about, tracing and all of that, the pandemic, and then an AI says, well, you know what, the best way to solve this problem is just to kill everybody, and then we won't have a pandemic problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so, that's the boundaries that you'd have to put around an AI, the ethical boundaries. You'd have to be able to say, we're looking for a solution, but here's what is not a solution. And we can do that with software. I mean, we have an ability to say, we want you to look for a solution, but here is what is not a solution. So these come off the table. Everything else is a possible solution. Now go try to figure it out.
Which then brings me to, then you have the humology aspect, and we have a lot of human error and decision making based on numbers and so forth, that we can look at our history and say there have been some really bad decisions made based on whatever criteria those decision makers had. And then infuse, we talked earlier, your faith. How can we start incorporating maybe a new level of ethics, morals, and almost a spiritology, where we're acknowledging some ecology that is kind of transcends the black and white of things. And I don't mean that in a racial way. I meant in a digital versus analog way.
Right. Well, there has to be a layer of ethics that gets integrated into the autonomous machines that we build. And I think that's the simplest way to think about it, is to say there has to be a layer of ethics that we have to build in. Let me give you some examples. You have a robot in a factory, and the robot is helping to build cars. The layer of ethic on the robot is, if a human being walks within 10 feet of your swing arm, you stop. Mm-hmm. You stop moving, because you can't know if the human is unwise enough to step right in front of your swing arm and get hit, and it might kill him. And so I have a layer of ethics built into my robot that says, if a human comes within 10 feet of your swing arm, you just stop, right? Not you try to be careful of the human, you stop, because you don't know what the human's going to do, right? So in software, when let's say you have a lending system, so you have a piece of software like Rocket Mortgage that is making an automated decision on doing a loan. Okay, there has to be a layer of ethics that's built in there that says you're not going to turn down loans just because they live in the inner city. Because if you let the AI figure out itself what loans it's going to make, it's going to do what's called redlining, right? It's going to say, well, I'm not going to do any loans in the inner city because I've had too many that go bad, right? Well, that's illegal. So, there has to be a layer of ethics that says, no, you have to look at every loan on its merits, and you can't look at where it is physically. So there are so many places today where we need to apply ethics where it's not getting applied in the software, or the ethics that are being applied really need to be questioned. A simple example, I'll give you two examples. If you look at Tinder, right, you look at the dating apps, there's an AI behind the dating apps that if you swipe left, right, on 3 women, Doug, that happen to be blonde because you like blonde women, well, now the algorithm goes, oh, well, Doug likes blonde women. That's all we're going to show him, right? So that is now a bias that is built into that software where they think they're trying to help you. But what they just did was narrow down the field of people you could actually have a date, to only blonde women, which is not wise. Like, that's not smart. Well, it gets even worse if you look at predictive policing. Like, predictive policing has done a tremendous job of getting police to go physically be at places where crime might happen today, right? It's cut down crime by, let's say, 40% in some major cities. So predictive policing is great. Here's the ethical problem, and I noticed one city in California banned predictive policing a couple of weeks ago. So the problem that we found with predictive policing is every time you start arresting more people in a certain part of downtown, let's say, then the predictive model starts saying, well, there's more and more arrests coming from that place downtown, so let's put more and more police there. So when you put more and more police there, there's more and more arrests. And so it becomes a self-reinforcing AI that just says, well, the only place you need to be is right here. And well, since the police are all there, then they're only going to arrest people that are right there. So what happens is, let's just say you have a predominantly white neighborhood and there hasn't been many arrests there. Well, then they never have police there. So now there's never any arrests there. And if you keep sending police to a predominantly black part of the community, well, then that's where all the arrests are coming from, right? Well, pretty soon the AI says, well, there's no criminals over in this housing edition. All the criminals are over in this edition because that's where all the arrests are coming from. There you go, right? There's an ethics problem. You automate and you use AIs to drive behavior, and at the first glance, it works pretty well. But if you don't apply an ethics layer to it, it just can get out of control.
Well, and yeah, it's like the built-in reticular activator system of our brains into computers, and we see that with everything, like even on Facebook. The whole idea is whatever you engage in, Facebook wants you there. So if you're on Facebook going, arg, 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 I hate this person, that person, you guys suck, and then more people are engaging, Facebook goes, oh, that's what you want. Okay, here's more of that. As opposed to if you were going peace, love, and granola, and then Facebook goes, oh, you want more of that. And that's like high level. And then obviously there is a human element in there as well with, the way they program, I guess what now they decide, what is hate speech or offensive or whatever. And again, that's doing their best to put in a layer of ethics, but then now you're back into whose ethics? By what standard are we deciding? Because we have different models of the world, we disagree on what is potentially ethical or moral to begin with.
Yeah. So you're talking about the echo chamber effect.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, and yes, technology and AI can create an echo chamber effect that is not healthy at all. And again, without some layer of ethics on top of that says, hey, when Doug searches for something, I'm not going to give him all Republican stuff. And today, that's the way the algorithms are built. Oh, Doug loves Republican stuff, so we're only going to show him Republican stuff because that's what he wants. Well, that's missing a layer of ethics, right? That would say, no, we need to at least give him 20% or 30% of an opposing opinion,
mm-hmm.
right? So, we'll get better at this. We're not that good at it now, but we'll get better at understanding there has to be an ethics layer integrated into almost all technology.
Well, I'm hoping that we could do this on a human level too, because it's not just Facebook that is doing that. I'm sure you've seen with all the challenges today, people actually saying, if you don't agree with me, go ahead, defriend me, creating their own vacuum, creating their own echo chamber of only having people and communicating people with who agree with them and vice versa, which is creating an even wider divide. And technology is supporting it. And that's such an interesting time as we watch it. I mean, that's the pain I see is so many people in pain and then it being propagated and pushed forward by the way they use their technology, which reinforces the very pain they're experiencing in the first place. And how do you interrupt that pattern is such an interesting challenge.
Yes, technology amplifies. So it'll amplify your bad behavior. It can amplify your good behavior. It'll amplify your bias, right? Or not, So technology just amplifies. That's what it does.
It'd be pretty cool if there was kind of like how there's an app, or I think in the iPhone now it shows you, how much screen time you had and so forth. I wonder if there would be a way, or if there's an algorithm that could be created that actually creates like a holistic view a little bit, like just kind of offering some other perspectives as you were searching something, whatever. Hey, you saw this. Here's something else. Because I find myself doing that to the best of my ability. If someone shares something and it intrigues me, I go, okay, well, that's interesting. Let me see what is the other side of that. Like, what's the other end of the spectrum here, just so I have a deeper understanding as to what is the motivating factors behind this. I don't know. Is there technology out there that does something like that?
Not that I've seen a lot of. I think that, though, you have to think in terms of generations. The first generation was just how can we customize things so that you really like them so that our company can make money.
Yeah.
Right. I think you're looking at second, third generation thinking to say, all right, how do we use this technology to make people better human beings? And I'm not sure we're there yet.
And how do you think this is going to, I know they're in New York, they're talking about it. I don't know if anyone has come to you about this, about education and how technology is, I mean, I know kids, obviously our daughter has an iPad and she knows how to use it and so forth, but there's an element of, sort of a necessity of being in person and having the ability to monitor, especially with young children who already have ADD to begin with, just by their nature of curiosity. Where do you see technology going in education? And particularly for younger generations, because as you get older, you can clearly, implement some of your own personal responsibility. But when you're under 10, it's a little more challenging.
I just think education is going to learn to be more hybrid. So there's been an opportunity for 20 years for K through 12 to be more hybrid, and both society being used to the model of send people to school for 8 hours, working parents wanting their kids to go to school for 8 hours, the schools being built to have people come for 8 hours, designed that way. Lack of having every child having a device. There have been a handful of things that have kept us in a world of just ship them all to school for 8 hours.
Right.
But I think this is a catalyst in breaking that down, quite a bit. And there's no way this rubber band goes back to the way it was as far as K through 12 education. It won't.
Nope.
It's a lot like work from home, right? It's just not going to go back to the way it was. The question is, will it be 5% different, 50% different? It'll depend on the school. It'll depend on the grade, right? It'll depend on the administration. There's going to be no set rules. But I think what we will see is the hybridization, where the school starts to figure out how to understand what kids need to be at the school versus what kids can do well on their own. Mm-hmm. And probably less demand of you have to attend school or you are truant, right? Because I think they will figure out, well, there's some kids that, if they attend 2 days a week and then work, do their work on their own the other 3 days a week, they're killing it. They're doing fantastic, so do we make them come all 5 days so that they go to gym? Do we make them come, all 5 days just for the social, impact of it? So I just think there'll be a hybridization of education of K through 12, and that this will be the catalytic event that did that.
For sure. Well, it's obviously clearly happening. Do you see virtual reality becoming that much more of an experience just for engagement sake, to keep people more engaged and focused? Is that a technology? I don't know if any studies have been done as far as the efficacy of anything in the VR world.
I suspect it won't be live VR, where you put your kid in the VR rig and then they're attending class. I think it'll be more, you'll see VR with specific lessons. Mm. So if you want to teach a child about what it's like to be Native American, you'll send home the Native American VR app. Mm. And so they'll put it on and be able to see how a tribe lived, right? And literally sit in the teepee, right? Or sit at the fire, or, right, sit during the ceremony, which will be fantastic. Right, you'll be able to experience what it's like to be a Native American in a way I never could when I was young by just reading books.
Right.
So I think that's where we'll see it.
How close are we to a holodeck?
We're a long way away from a holodeck because even if you can give 360 view, but in a holodeck, they were running around and doing all kinds of activities and interacting with the deck, and we don't have that. Right, the closest thing, not anytime soon, not the full holodeck, because I know what you're talking about with the holodeck, and I know what they did on a holodeck, and we're not going to replicate that anytime soon.
Right.
But I think not having to have a VR rig and being able to walk into a room that's 360, I think that we could do.
Yeah, I mean, actually, just come to visualizing that. We make these green screen rooms. There's no reason why we couldn't have it all be, between holograms and, I guess, imagery, like just plain old 3D imagery on the not printed, but, projected or injected.
Right.
That would be, which is fascinating. Right. Because that would be one of the ways, because that's the challenge I see with young ones is the engagement and keeping them focused. Because the other thing I even noticed with our daughter, I mean, she's 5, but her attention span, even when she's watching, the iPad, sometimes she only watches, 20, 30 seconds. She's like, okay, next. And there's that if they have the ability to do so, they will. So how do you keep them so engaged that, because we're kinesthetic as well, like we have the different learning styles, visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. How do we integrate all of those, especially when we have some favorability, like some, I'm more kinesthetic than, so I need to kind of do it to feel it, or to learn it more effectively, which is just insane. So when you look at all of the things that are happening right now, and things have been speeding up, do you see any things in particular that we should be sort of aware of that, as a person, whether it be personally or professionally or spiritually, with how we can embrace the speed at which things are happening at this point?
I'll tell you the number one thing that I think people need to do is really consciously improve their learning ecosystem. We talk a lot about rivers of information, that the internet and technology has created an ability to have rivers of information into your mind. And I think one of the things the opportunity they're missing most right now is that they're not very conscious about the rivers of information into their mind. And so, I was just on vacation with some family, and some of them sat and watched Fox News for about 8 hours a day. Right?
That's a lot of
period. Yeah. So it's like, well, you get points for, watching something where you're learning, however, you get minus points that's the only thing in your river. Yeah. And it's biased, right? Because almost any channel is biased. So I think the number one thing with technology that people are losing an opportunity is consciously saying, all right, I got X amount of time a day to be able to take input and to learn. So what does that river look like? What does that learning ecosystem look like? And we do a lot of work at our firm on what is a learning ecosystem, how do you build it, what's a river of information, how do you build it, how do you become conscious of all of this, how do you maximize this, and let's say splitting it 50-50, personal and business. So I'm going to spend half of my time focusing on my career and how do I learn more from my career, the other half of my time, how do I become a better human being? And so as I look forward, if somebody says, hey, Scott, what's your advice for me? And I don't care if you're a young person or an old person, my number one piece of advice is going to be make sure you consciously look at your learning ecosystem and consciously understand the river of information coming into your brain and craft it, architect it, so that you're learning things that are valuable to learn. And don't stick things in your brain that are not valuable, because it's a waste of time.
Well, and that becomes a virus inside your brain. Because
it does. Yep. It distracts you. It really does. It just distracts you.
Well, which then brings me to kind of like a little back to what we were talking about, the AI and the swing arm and so forth. And then obviously we've heard of computer viruses, and obviously we have human viruses. An interesting analogy and model on how we deal with viruses with humans and ultimately computers in strategies to, I guess, clean the system, as it were. How do you see virus security and technology developing, considering that an AI could also be a virus?
Well, we have cyber criminals now starting to use AI to be able to attack people, and then you have security people building AIs to try to defend. And so the sophistication level will just grow and grow and grow, is what we're going to see on both sides. I mean, we're going to see more and more sophisticated viruses or attack vehicles, and more sophisticated defense. And what we've seen for a little while is the criminals are a little bit better than the security people. And so that's why you see cybercrime has risen so much, right, over the last decade. And there are reasons for that, why the criminals move a little bit faster, than security people can move. But there's no question that intelligent attack vehicles and then intelligent security vehicles are fascinating, right, to look at what they're doing right now.
And it's kind of overwhelming when you think about how much we rely on technology these days, and how that's it's a subculture kind of going on, and how do we mind guard on our tech and on our experiences, knowing that is bizarre, like just a whole other mindset. Because we can't even trust sometimes when the phone rings. It could be there. We get a text. And it's like, oh, it's like, how does one not live in a bubble? And like you shared earlier with, kind of being peaceful and all the chaos and all of that, when we're constantly being inundated, where we've got to stand guard, yet at the same time, we've got to embrace the technology.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're at a bad time right now. I think we'll get a lot better at being able to authenticate something that's happening, right? Or blocking something that we don't want. So we'll get better and better at this. But yeah, it's like I don't answer my phone. I mean, if it doesn't come up with a name of somebody I know, I don't answer it.
Yeah, me neither.
The end, period. And I think a lot of people have gotten that direction. So, we're developing ways to make sure, that we don't get abused. But that's tough for, older folks and, people who don't understand the game and don't understand technology as well as you and I do.
Well, what happened yesterday? It just happened yesterday. An auto dialer for my mortgage company wouldn't stop ringing the phone. Because I guess that whole mindset as well is when there's people, if they're, you get nervous because if someone calls and maybe they were calling from another number and you don't pick up, they're like, oh, I just got to call them again. They're going to know it's urgent. And they're going to finally pick up. And that's what I did after the fourth time. I'm like, good Lord, man. And then I listen and then I'm like, oh, no, this is an auto dialer. And then it's like, hey, this is Donovan from, Loan Depot or whatever. Do you know that? I'm like, oh, come on, really, dude? So they're not even dialing the phones. The auto dialers are doing it, and they're getting smart.
Yeah. Yep, that's true.
So with all that being said, we've covered so much. Any final sort of observations where it's anything that your heart is, weighing to share? Because I know you're an extraordinary deep person, and I know we've kind of gone all over the place. I'm really blessed to know you, and thank you for sharing your time. And I just wanted to know if there's any final bits of information or anything that you have going on that you want to share, that we can, get information out there so people can work with you.
Well, look, let me tell you what I want to share. As far as people working with us, anybody who wants to or needs to be able to look into the future and deal with technology and use technology to try to be a good tool in the world. We love to help folks like that. And if somebody needs a speaker who has a good inventory of edgy ideas about where things are going in the future, love to do the speaking. When you say any last thing to share, the most important thing I think for me to share probably would be a message of hope, because this year has been chaotic, and it's going to continue to be chaotic, I think, for the rest of the year. And I really see, a lot of people it's having a negative impact on. Just a lot of anxiety, a lot of frustration, a lot of discontent, a lot of divisiveness, and I guess the biggest last message for me is, like, I grew up in the 60s. Okay. If you were around in the 60s, we've seen this all before, because in the 60s, you had the Vietnam War. You had all the protests against the Vietnam War. We had a president that in the early 70s, had to leave office because of Watergate. We had a lot of divisiveness between the hippie generation and their parents and the older generation. We saw worse than this, because at Kent State, they were shooting protesters. In the 60s, we had the same kind of volatility, and we lived through it, and we grew. We learned, we improved as a society. I just hope people who maybe did not live through the 60s or do not have that kind of context, that you look at this year and you don't completely panic and lose your mind. There are reasons to be peaceful, and there's reasons to be calm, and there's reasons to be hopeful, because what we are going through now, seriously, it is less chaotic than what we went through in the 60s. And we will get through this. We will learn a lot of really good lessons. We will improve humanity after coming out of this year. And that would be my last message to people is, hey, let's be spreaders of a message of hope, and get people to have a perspective that all is not lost, even though sometimes you look at the media and you feel like that all might be lost. This is just a chaotic year, and some years are like this. We didn't expect a lot of these things to happen. We have an interesting confluence. We just need to learn our lessons, make improvements, and then move on.
Amen, brother. I mean, do you think that it appears worse than it is in context because of how quickly and how pervasively the information is shared, and dare I say that news has become more of an editorial as opposed to reporting? So people are kind of told what to think based on whatever consumption, as you shared earlier, whatever's information they're getting, and that hopefully it'll get over with quicker too?
No question that social media and traditional media have completely changed things. We went from a world back in the 60s where there really was very little news. I mean, you had to watch TV at 6 o'clock or 10 o'clock. I mean, or read a newspaper. There was very little news, to a world now with an overwhelming amount of what can't even be called news in most cases. It's just opinion, like you said. And so we went from a world where you had to make a conscious decision to attach a little bit to the news, to now a world where we have to make a conscious decision to detach.
Yeah.
Right? And I think people haven't made that adjustment in a lot of cases. And they are sucked into a whirlwind of way too much input and way too much unhealthy input. And it's causing a lot of depression and a lot of anxiety and a lot of frustration. And I feel really badly for some of the people around me, who I see, who I can tell they are very strung out, and I just want to say to them, it is not as bad as it appears. It is not. And if you will remain calm and just work through this, as we all need to, you will find a brighter day on the other side of this.
Amen. I mean, I do hope it's so crazy, because while we're doing this, utilizing the very technology that is kind of sucking us or some out of the game, is that I think if people did spend way less time on this technology and pick up a book, pick up, an opportunity to educate in other ways, instead of just, Googling or, getting sucked down that rabbit hole, because again, those algorithms are going to influence. But if you could actually just do some quiet time and connect with people again, and really come from a space of love and honor and respect and assume the best about people, we could definitely start turning the ship a lot quicker as well, because I think there's a lot of, that confirmation bias and assumption going on about others without really getting to know them, which is why I did do this, is to expose people to brilliant minds and hearts to go, hey, look, here's here's some other ways of thinking. Here's some other perspectives, and try it on. If it works for you, great. If not, that's okay too. But at least give it a shot and understand that, the people who have an opinion, it is coming from a positive place. The outcome is what we want to focus on, not the process, on how we get there. Because as you know, there's all different ways to ultimately get to the end result, but we all need to be on the same page on that result. And I think that's where I think the conversation could best be suited, is like, where do we want to go? Like, how do we want the world to be? And then start worrying about how we get there, instead of just worrying about how and not worrying about what and why.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I agree.
Food for thought.
I agree, Doug. We need a little bit more being proactive and a little less being reactive.
Yeah, 100%. Well, brother, thank you so much. I love you for who you are, who you aren't. Love to your family. I know that, things are, crazy, and you guys are navigating it. And I truly appreciate you. And of course, if there's anything I could do for you, my resources are your resources. And, just continue the positivity and moving forward.
Well, Doug, I feel the same. Thank you for visiting. I love the visit. Hopefully we gave some people some interesting ideas today.
I believe we did, brother. So thank you so much.
All right.
And we will see you again shortly.
All right. Sounds good.
Thank you. Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for stopping by and hanging with us. And remember to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts right here. And we look forward to serving you even more. Remember, download your free guided hypnotic meditation at guidedhypnotic.com. That's guidedhypnotic.com, where you'll get your free anxiety-busting meditation. We look forward to serving you, and if you have any questions, comments, please feel free to reach out. All right, we love you for who you are and who you aren't. God bless.